beautiful Sunday day. Sunday day, not sunny day. Sunday day. We know it's not going to be nice out there for much longer. But that's okay, it's nice in here. I don't know if we're missing a lot of people because they're expecting the weather to turn bad really fast, or what? Or maybe everybody will just show up halfway through the service.
No problem.
Probably.
But we're going to begin our service with a word of prayer, and then we're going to sing one of the songs that I wrote a number of years ago, River of Revival, because we want the river of the revival to flow through here and to come. And to do that, we also need the Holy Spirit to come here and flow through here as well. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day that you've given us. We thank you that we can gather in a place that is dedicated and consecrated to you for your glory. And Lord, I pray that as we are here, that we would be bringing glory and honor to you that is due your name.
Yes.
Lord, that as we sing our songs of praise, as we pray our prayers, as we look into your word, that we would be drawing closer and closer to you. That you would be revealing yourself to us more and more. And that the more that you reveal to us, the more that we want. And Lord, I pray for each person that is currently here. I pray for each person that is currently on the way. That, Lord, that we would be preparing our hearts, preparing our minds to focus on you, and to open our ears to be able to hear your voice and what you're speaking to us. Lord, for those who are sick and unwell, we pray that your healing hand would be upon them. For those who are fighting battles, we pray that you would be leading the charge. And Lord, that no matter what the battle is, that you would be leading the charge and leading into victory. Lord, for whatever is lacking, that you would supply above and beyond what is needed or expected. For whatever is in abundance, you would help us to notice where things lack to be able to fill. And Lord, may we become a community that is wholly looking and sustained by you. Lord, as we sing our songs of praise, I pray it's not just by rote or because the words are on the wall or the screen or the page, but that it would be our prayer and the cry of our hearts. Lord, that you would fill this place with your presence, that you would surround us, and that you would charge us up to go out to be your hands and your feet. Lord, we ask all this in your precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen.
To stand, or you can remain seated. We just ask that you worship in a way that is comfortable to you. Don't worry about who's around you or behind you. Make God your focus. I want to swim in the river of revival. I want to bathe on His beautiful shore. I want to dive right in, swim through deep till all there is Lord is here. Wash it all away. Only you remain, and revival flow this way. Let it overflow and cover the land. Wash us all with your glory. I want to swim in the river of revival. I want to bathe on His beautiful shore. I want to dive right in, swim real deep till all that is Lord is here. I want to dive I choose to follow you. It's easy to praise God in the good times. It becomes a bit more challenging in the bad times. But this next song talks about praising Him through it all. And if you've been following the Bible reading plan in the bulletin, you come through the book of Job, and you see that sometimes tough trials are to prove that God is still there beside us, but also that He has a better plan. Job got back a lot more than what he originally lost, even though going through the valley it was hard. He stayed true. Everybody told him, curse God and die. But he got mad at God, but he never cursed God. So when times get tough, we're still supposed to bless His name and praise His name. Blessed be your name in the land that is blessed and full, where the streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name when you're found in the desert place. Walk through the wilderness. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name when the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name on the road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Give and take away. Give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. Give and take away. Give and take away. My heart will choose feel like we're beaten down and been through the ringer and out the hopper. Lord, I pray that we would recognize that our strength comes from you. That when we feel like we just can't go on anymore, that we can rely on your strength and nothing is impossible. Amen. And Lord, I pray that you would bury deep within our hearts, that it would take root and take hold, that you are our everlasting God. You are our everlasting strength. And that if we're willing to risk everything to trust you, that you have greater things in store than we could ever think or imagine or dream. And Lord, may we be willing to put our hand in your hand, knowing that the way that you lead us is greater than any way we could go on our own. Lord, we thank you for your presence that's here this morning. Lord, we pray and just ask that it would permeate to our very core. That it would clean out our ears to be able to hear your voice clearly. That it would clean out our minds, that you would be our focus and our thoughts. Lord, that it would clean out our hearts to be able to make room for more of you, but also more love to be able to pour out to those around us. And Lord, as we transition our service and look at some business items and look into your word, I just ask that your presence would stay with us. And that you would open our eyes and open our ears to see and to hear what you have for us today. That you would equip us and fill us to be able to overcome anything that we would face for the rest of this day and also for the coming week. But may you be our strength, may you be our provider, and may we be willing to wholly trust in you. We ask all this in your precious and holy name. Amen. Everyone received the bulletin as you come in this morning? If not, there should be some left out on the information table. Tonight is canceled. There won't be the altar tonight. The weather that's being forecasted right around 6, 7 o'clock is supposed to change from snow to rain. We don't want you out on the roads then. And we definitely don't want you out on the roads at 8:30 or so when it concludes to go back home, especially if what they're forecasting is correct. So the altar won't be happening this evening. This week the information is in the bulletin for what is there. There's one correction though. It's saying prayer Monday, Wednesday, Friday. On Friday, as far as I know right now, there's supposed to be a ministerial meeting here starting at 9:30 in the morning. So I'll be tied up with that, and if there's other people here, they might get roped in and tied up to that as well. So Friday, there will be the prayer time here. You're more than welcome to pray at home or wherever you find yourself on Friday morning. Next Sunday night, when the dead live, we'll be back. We did our introductory last week. We had most everybody out for it. Well, half the people out that purchased books. If you did get a book and you weren't here yet, you can see me after the service and I'll get you one. You'll want to have the first chapter read by Sunday. And if you didn't purchase a book but you'd still like to come and figure out what it's all about, you're more than welcome to join us next Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Is anybody reading chronologically through the Bible in a year? There's a handful of us, okay? It is really good so far, putting into perspective that before Abraham, Job was. But it's coming up the rest, or this coming weeks is in there. There are 1 or 2 copies of the whole thing printed out. if you'd like one, and I can print off more. I just don't want to do a whole lot because it's like 10 pages for the whole year. So if you would like one, I don't have an issue printing them. I just don't want to print them and we end up tossing them out. So far, we're just over halfway through Genesis and all the way through Job. So if you did want to start, it's not too bad to get caught up. Once we get into February, you're into a third book at that point, and then it's a little bit daunting to try and get caught up and stay on. But if you're not following that one, hopefully I know there's some other people that are following other reading plans. So whether it's chapters a day, verses a day, or whatever, as long as you're constantly reading your Bible, that's the main goal. I've been meaning to announce this for a month now. Back on December 30th, I preached on fear and how we're not supposed to have fear and everything. I printed off a handout that was supposed to get handed out on that Sunday. And I kept forgetting to hand it out. There's 145 verses about do not be afraid, fear not, have no fear, and whatnot. So these will be around. Somebody took one of the I don't know what the proper term is, but there was a thing going around the internet saying that there's 365 instances in the Bible where it says, do not fear or fear not. Depending on your translation, you can find most of those, but not all of those. The guy who did this, he found 145. So now if you take it into context, even though it does say, even though it doesn't say fear not or do not fear, do not be afraid, context still is talking about fear, but it's not in there 365 times directly, fear not, do not fear, do not be afraid. But here is 145 of them. So you have to go through it 2.5 times in a year to get it, but it's a very good resource to have, and stick it on your fridge, do it as your Bible study, whatever, and they are here as well. Has everybody filled out their contact information form yet? There's a couple of reasons we want this, why we need it up to date. I know some of you, I have 3 and 4 different versions of this on hand. Some of you, I don't have any. We are getting ready that hopefully the first Sunday of February, we will start handing out income tax receipts for 2018. We would like to have your correct address, postal address on them. So that's one reason. The other reason is we would like to put up a directory for our church family that we can hand out to our church family. Every so often I get a request, do you have so-and-so's number? And most of the time it's, no, I don't. Do you know how I can get it? Ask them. So this will kind of help everything in that one. Also, over the next couple of weeks, for parents, I think we have the majority of them for your children, but if not, we also have one of these per child to be able to fill out for information. And in the other, there's another spot, any other information you would like us to know on this one and also on the kids one. Any allergies would be great to know, especially if they're food allergies. We're aware of a couple, but if there's anything else, we'd like to have it where we don't have to exclude children based on ingredients and snack times and whatnot, so. But if you're able to help with this for income tax receipt purposes and also for a directory, that would be greatly appreciated. And I think that's all that we have for announcements. Is the craft night still on for Tuesday evening? Yes, okay. It is in the bulletin. You'll have to come and find out what's happening.
Bring your own project.
Oh, bring your own project, okay. Who's collecting our offering this morning? Matthew and Ashley.
No, thank you.
No? Come on, you got it. Lord, we thank you for what you give to us. And as we give a portion back to you, no matter how great, no matter how small, no matter if it's there, we're offering you ourselves. We ask that you take it, multiply it, and use it for the furthering of your kingdom. We ask this in your precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen.
At this time, we'll call forward the children for Sunday school. Dear Lord, we thank you for each of these children, for each of these leaders. Now, Lord, we just ask that you open their hearts and open their minds to see and to hear what you have for them. Lord, for the teachers, that you would give the wisdom and the knowledge necessary to be able to convey in a way that everybody will understand. And Lord, we ask all this in your precious and holy name. Amen. I think we found our drummer. If you remember last week, we started looking at stewardship. Now, giving is not always about money, but it's also giving of our time, our talents, other resources. And we looked at 2 Corinthians 9:7, one of the verses. And it reads, "So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, For God loves a cheerful giver. This week I want us to look a little bit deeper. And we'll see that it's what's more important is how we give than what we give. In Mark 12, we find Jesus in the temple. He's teaching, but he's also watching people as they come and go and what they're doing. He's sitting near the treasury. I guess in the temple, when you come in, there was a separate room to put your offering in, and someone was there to collect it rather than passing around the plate like we do. But Jesus noticed that some would bring in bags of money or other items. And then Jesus notices an older, frail woman come in, and she hands over 2 mites. A mite would be, well, we don't even have it anymore, a penny. Actually, it wasn't even equivalent to a penny, it was less. But Jesus saw this as a teaching opportunity for his disciples. So in Mark 12, 41 to 44, we see this. Now Jesus sat opposite the treasury and saw how the people put money into the treasury. And many who were rich put in much. Then one poor widow came and threw in 2 mites, which make a quadrus. So he called his disciples to himself and said to them, Assuredly I say to you, that this poor woman has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury. For they put in out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. It's not what we give, it's how we give. Do we give cheerfully, or do we begrudgingly give? Reach our hand in our pocket, pull out the change that's there and toss it in the plate, or the bills that's there and toss it in the plate. Well, I'm here, I gave. Remember the video from last week? Mr. Empty Envelope guy? Yeah, he gave cheerfully, but he gave nothing. Do we help because we feel we have something to contribute? Or because we feel that we have to, or it's not going to happen? And then the other thing is, who says that what we're giving for, or what we think we're giving for, needs to happen anyway? Sometimes we get caught up in a routine, and about what was once fun and exciting has now become dull, boring, almost expected, seemingly pointless. Other times we give so we can get our own way. Well, if I give this huge check, then they'll have to listen to me because. Or whatever, whether it's carpet color or resources, which Bible study thing we're going to use next or whatever, just because we give the most doesn't mean that what we want is what's best for everybody. When we give, we have to trust that what we give will be used for the benefit of all. Not just for our benefit because we give. Notice what Jesus said about the widow. She gave more than the others who gave out of abundance because she gave what she really did not have to give. Yet, she still gave it, and she still gave it willingly, she still gave it happily, and she still gave it regardless. It cost her a lot more to hand over those 2 mites than it did for the guy who brought in a bag of 10,000 shekels. When it comes to stewardship and giving, tradition often dictates our actions. It's what always was, and it's what always is going to be as long as I'm around. Doesn't mean it's right. We copy what we see or what we've been told. Doesn't necessarily mean that what we see or what we've heard is what is called for. But it's the way it's always been. The issue with this is that there are more times when tradition is warped and twisted and made up, not following God's plan at all. Luke 11:42, we find Jesus rebuking the scribes and the Pharisees because they make sure to tithe even the little things and ignore the bigger issues of justice and mercy. What good is it to give if we ignore what else is happening around us? Luke 11:42 says, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and yet you pass by justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone." The Pharisees were happy to tithe on their spices and tithe on whatever it was, but they'd walk by and those begging at the gate, they'd kick dust up. We have to help and we have to give. Sometimes our giving is a hand. Sometimes our giving is $1. But we can't give and not help, and we can't help and not give. We require both. What Jesus said in Luke 11:42 tells me that even though giving of our money is important, giving of our time, our talents, our resources is also important, if not more important. Sometimes we give to make things disappear so we don't have to see them or hear about them anymore. Jesus, when Judas rebuked the woman with the perfume for what he said wasting, could have been sold to help the poor, what did Jesus say? The poor you will always have with you. Me, I won't be with you all that long. She did what was necessary and important here and now. Sometimes what we think is a waste is being the hands and feet to Jesus of somebody who actually needs to see Jesus in that instance. The world likes to be paid for their services. Therefore, giving of our money is important. So far, for 2019, we have spent more out in oil than what has come in offerings. And within the next 3 days, the tank will be filled again. We can't operate that way. That's just one of the areas. That doesn't include electricity and everything else. That's just heat. I know January is a hard month, but our expenses still go on, and we still expect to have happen in January what happens the rest of the year. But what little bit we have built up can easily disappear into oil alone, especially if we have more weeks like we've had the past 2. And after today, we're supposed to go back down to another decrease. Just one example. But we can't only just give money and not give of our time, talents, and other resources. Because what good is it to have a warm building and a full oil tank if we're not reaching out beyond our walls?
That's right. Amen.
Here, Jesus is condemning the Pharisees for following the letter of the law, but ignoring the context of the law. The Pharisees were acting one way, but living a completely different way. For those who are keeping track of dates and everything, this is my first Sunday of year number 2 with you.
Yay!
In that year, although today doesn't really show that, we've quadrupled in size
Amen.
Of our average attendances.
Yes. Amen.
To me, I'm not happy with that. I want to be more. I want more people coming in.
Yes.
Current size, 35 to 40 people a week. But if we're happy with 35 to 40 people, we're not fulfilling the Great Commission. We have to constantly be reaching more people.
Yes.
Remaining the same makes us stagnant. What becomes stagnant usually dies. I lived in Alberta for 12 years, and because Alberta is a lot of farmland, there's a lot of open water systems. Those that are running out and running in remain fresh, but those that are dug to be a reservoir for emergency situations or whatever, they're not constantly running in, they become stagnant, and they're called sloughs in Alberta. Sloughs on a hot summer day stink. When we become stagnant, we stink. Not to each other, but to the world that we're supposed to be trying to reach. We always want to smell fresh to the world. Make us appealing. And to do that requires us to give and sacrifice. Matthew's version of Jesus going after the scribes and Pharisees is found in Matthew 23, 27 to 28. We looked at Luke's account. Matthew gets a little bit more in depth in his description. He has Jesus saying, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." We can make ourselves look good on the outside, but it's what's inside that is what counts and what matters. And when the inside is stagnant, eventually it will show outside. There won't be enough makeup to cover it. If you were here last week and saw the video, the skinny on tithing, what Jesus is describing here is the first guy, Mr. Empty Envelope guy. People think he was giving. People thought he was living up to their expectations. But instead he wasn't. And if you remember when his little segment ended, the person off camera said, "But God knows," and he turns around, "What?" And then they went into the next guy. When Samuel was sent to anoint king as David, or David as king, he went through all of Jesse's sons. Big, strong, strapping young men. This must be it. No. This must be. No. Well, there's nobody left. Oh yeah, there's one more. Then comes this scrawny little teenager that you could probably pick up with your finger and fling halfway across the world. And Samuel's like, what? God says, it's not the outward appearance that I see, it's the inward appearance that I see. Nothing matches David. We can look like we have it all together, but the only one we're fooling is ourselves. And God's not amused. 2018 for us here was a year of essentially being reborn. We've come through trials, a period without a pastor, dwindling down to a handful, sometimes even less than a handful. Trying different ways to make things happen. Sometimes it worked a little bit, sometimes it made things a whole lot worse. But 2019, I believe, will be a year of growing pains. God is calling us just as he called the Israelites. Remember the Israelites, the Hebrews? They were in Egypt. They kept calling out to God because they were in bondage. Send us somebody to free us. God sent Moses. God gave his laws and everything to Moses. They weren't happy with that. They rebelled. And they ended up 40 years wandering around. God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. All they had to do was obey and to trust God. Yahweh, the great I am. That's all God required, was faith and trust in him. What happened when Moses sent 12 spies in to Jericho, into the land flowing with milk and honey. They came back to describe the land. Two of them were very positive. It flows with milk and honey. The grapes are so big we can't carry them. But 10 of the spies are like, yeah, it's flowing with milk and honey, but the people there are huge. We look like grasshoppers to them. They'll kill us off, they'll enslave our children and our wives, and then what? Joshua and Caleb saw things through God's eyes. The other 10 spies saw things through their own eyes. Here's the thing, when God says you're going to go to, you will get there. It doesn't matter what the road is like. When God says, I am taking you to this destination, arrival is not questionable. You might come through near-death experiences, but you will get there. So what happened after the people believed the 10 and not the 2? They wandered around for 40 years. While that disbelieving generation died off. Not only that, but scholars say that for that 40 years, they never left an area greater than 200 square miles. Can you imagine that? 40 years wandering around 200 square miles. Now, I tried to find an area that we could compare to that. And what I came up with was kind of this. It's an area about the size of from Glace Bay to Sydney, including the surrounding area between us, New Waterford, Dominion, Lingan, all those areas. 40 years wandering around in an area that big, not realizing they're going in circles. And there were probably a couple billion of them. Can you imagine a couple billion people living in Glace Bay, Sydney area? According to Stats Canada, there's less than 150,000 people in that area now. But just to give a little bit of perspective. But the reason I'm saying all of this, the point that I'm trying to make, is that 2019, I believe, will be a year where we will truly have to answer the question for ourselves personally and corporately. Are we willing to be in it for the long haul? Do we trust God enough to follow Him wholeheartedly? Do we want to dig in and do all we can, or do we want to dig in our heels and say, no, you can't make me? Do we believe God has given us Glace Bay and it's ours for the taking? Or that there's no way God could ever give us Glace Bay, and why are we wasting our time? Those are questions we have to really answer for ourselves, because I truly believe God has given us Glace Bay.
Amen.
The same way He gave the Hebrews Jericho. But where are my Joshua and Caleb's, and where are my other 10? And to the other 10, seriously consider changing to a Joshua and Caleb. Because 40 years of wandering around isn't good. The signs of the times say we don't have 40 years left. Time is of the essence. Are we willing to risk for the sake of gain? Or are we seeing giants and death and ourselves as mere grasshoppers? Remember, how we give is more important than what we give, even though what we give is also important. It's no good to give thousands of dollars if we're begrudgingly and stingy, saying, I will give you $1,000 if it gets spent only this way. Especially if it doesn't help us reach Glace Bay and area. Like the Pharisees, are we doing one thing right and then 1,000 other things wrong? I hope not. We cannot afford to play games. Eternity is in the balance, and we cannot put a price tag on eternity. Last year, I was part of a leadership group put on by the district called Healthy Church Network. I've mentioned it a couple times. Every 6 or 8 weeks, I travel down to Port Hawkesbury and meet with other ministers. And then we would connect online to 3 other groups around our district. 2 in New Brunswick and 1 more down in the Halifax area. There were things to read, there were things to accomplish, there were discussions. Most of it was very well done, and I got quite a bit out of it. But there were some parts to it that had little to zero relevance that I didn't really care for, but because it was part of the requirements, I had to do them anyway. But one of the books that came out of that, it was called Steering Through Chaos, and it's written by an Assemblies of God pastor down in Texas. It was a very good read, actually. I photocopied a couple of the chapters and handed it up to the board. But one of the things that he mentioned in the book, and he learned from his father, who was also a pastor, is that the church will only grow to the size of the pastor's pain threshold. So how high can a pain threshold go? It depends on what? Number one, it depends on the pastor. Some of us can handle a lot more than others. But it also depends on where the pain is from or what the pain is stemming to. It depends on a lot of variables that cannot be controlled, such as income, volunteers, involvement, harassment, family, and many other things that we could list forever. But the thing is, as long as the pastor is willing to fight for the vision that God has given them, the sky's the limit. But the more oppressors that come against the pastor, his family, the more people that crush the vision and the dream that he sees, the less effort over time that they're going to put in. I was pretty young in ministry. I was about as green as a cucumber when I got my first full-time pastorate. And in that, I faced some pretty big struggles. After 2 years, or not quite 2 years of being there, what I thought was going good and holding great, the bottom fell out. I went to the district and sought advice, guidance. And a member of the district executive at the time gave me a word of advice that I used more times than I can count. And what they said was this: there are always at least 3 sides involved to any situation. Number 1, there's my side, which involves me, my ministry. Number 2, there's my family. Number 3, there's the church. No matter what is faced, those 3 are constant, and you have to look at it in the way: who's going to win, who's going to lose, what's going to be lost, and what is the best outcome possible. As you're aware, hard decisions are not easy to make. Some are more difficult than others. But when I look at situations and consider how my decision will affect each of these areas, it's usually a bit easier to make my decision. Who's going to come ahead? Now, in the instance for where I was given that information, I ended up resigning. That was the best outcome scenario that I could see, no matter how I played it. The district offered that if I were to stay, they would back me to the wall. The issue was, the way that everything was, I would have split the church down the middle. Therefore, I lost the church. Probably would have somewhere in that been forced to leave. So therefore, there's 2 of 3 sides losing automatically. But what about my family? If I would have stuck, I would have lost them, and therefore losing everything. How much pain is a pastor willing to endure? It really depends on what's at stake. What's important to that pastor? If my ministry at that location would have been important, I could have lost everything else. What I looked at as important in that situation was the church remaining intact and being able to carry on and grow. Me having a semi-decent reputation leaving out of there, and my family standing by me no matter what. And I'm happy to report that for a while, everybody won. Even though I ended up resigning the way everything worked out, everybody won in the long run. For the past couple of months anyway, and probably a little bit longer, one of the things that God has laid on my heart is, what am I willing to give up to see the greater happen? And He hasn't given me terms. Is that giving up people? Is that giving up resources? Is that giving up what? But one of the biggest unknown variables to me with that question is not giving up. It's how long before I give up till it's replaced with what is promised. That's where faith gets a workout.
Mm-hmm.
That's where faith either grows or completely disappears. It's easy to be on a mountaintop and have a great view and say, okay, the next mountain I can see. But as you work your way down into the valley, the next mountain disappears out of view. How long before it comes back? The other thing is, how big is the next mountain? From a distance, it looks huge. But at the same time, it looks very small. It looks like it could be smaller than the mountain we're currently on. But it could be a whole lot higher. It could be a whole lot bigger. What is the terrain between where we're at to where we're supposed to go? Remember 2 weeks what I said? We're called to the next level, but there's no elevator and there are no stairs. Are we willing to make a way to climb to the next level, regardless of what comes in our way? How we give is more important than what we give. And eternity should be in our view when we consider what it is we're giving. Giving less than our all is not optional. But all is not emptying out our bank accounts. What I want to encourage you is to be willing to fight for the vision of moving forward. To stake claim and believe with all your heart, with all your strength, and with all your mind that God has given us Glaze Bay. And that God is also going to provide what is necessary for us to reach Glaze Bay. Sometimes from our own pockets, other times from outside sources. But if we're not willing to put in everything we're able to put in, we cannot expect God to give from outside sources. It's not giving all, it's giving what we can, what we're called to. Sometimes what we feel we can give and what we can actually give, there's a great difference between the two. We need to ask God to show us what it is that He sees and how we can achieve it. Because what God sees is completely different from what you and I see. It's easy to play church, but God doesn't call us to play church. God calls us to be the church. And remember what Jesus said to Peter? Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. If we're in His power, under His authority, we cannot fail.
Amen.
I've got one person with me.
Yes.
Only one?
No.
If we are under His power, in His power and under His authority, we cannot fail.
Amen.
That's better. Even when it seems like all is lost, God will come through. We have to be faithful. We have to trust. if we're more concerned about looking the part than actually fulfilling the part, we're going to get washed away in what God is going to do over the next few months. We have to be willing to go the distance. I say this as a word of caution, but I also say this as a word of encouragement. If God is for us, there's nothing that can stand against us to destroy us.
Amen.
Right. Amen.
But there will be times when it seems like defeat is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
But God's given us the power. We just have to plug into it.
Amen.
Of course, with the weather that's happening, we're going to play it safe and sorry, but the altar is one of those instances where we can come and plug in. But we don't need to wait for the altar.
That's right.
We don't even need to be here.
Amen.
We just have to seek God and plug in. I want us to conclude today by singing a song. It's a somewhat newer song, but at the same time, it's still 3 or 4 years old. It was written by Jeremy Camp and Jason Ingram, and it was released this past November by Russ Taff on his new CD. And the song is called Same Power. And I can guarantee you're going to hear it a lot this year. I love this song. I've kind of made it my theme song. And it's got a message that is just incredible. The first time I heard it, it was clicked in and I had to go and restart the song to pay attention to it. But this song talks about living not just in power, but in God's power. And every verse ends by saying, we will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. Do you realize in a lot of cases, sometimes it's our choices that allow us to be overtaken and overcome? It's a mindset. I'm going to lose anyway, so why put in the effort? Failure's not an option. Eternity's in the balance. But the chorus says, the same power that rose Jesus from the grave, the same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. The same power that moves mountains when he speaks, the same power that can calm a raging sea, lives in us. You're not listening. You can't be. You're asleep. I put you to sleep, haven't I? The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, commands the dead to wake, moves mountains when he speaks, and calms raging seas, lives in us.
Amen.
That's a little bit better. Okay, you guys have got to stand up.
Yeah.
And you got to try and sing along with this. D. The same power I can see waters raging at my feet. I can feel breath of those surrounding me. I can hear
Sound of nations rising up, we will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. I can walk down this dark and painful road, I can face every fear of the unknown, I can hear all God's children singing out, we will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. Same power that rose Jesus from the grave, same power that commands the dead to wake lives in us, lives in us. Same power that moves mountains when He speaks, same power that can calm a raging sea lives in us, lives in us, lives in us, lives in us. We have hope that His promises are true. We have strength. There is nothing we can do. Yes, we know there are greater things in store. We will not be overtaken. We will not be overcome. Same power that rose Jesus from the grave, same power that commands the dead to wake lives in us, lives in us. Same power that moves mountains when He speaks, same power that can calm a raging sea lives in us, lives in us. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, same power that commands the dead to wake lives in us, lives in us. Same power that moves mountains when He speaks, same power that can calm a raging sea lives in us, lives in us. Greater is He that is within me, He has conquered our enemy. No power of darkness, no weapon prevails. We stand here in victory. Same power that rose Jesus from the grave, same power that commands the dead to wake lives in us, lives in us. Same power that moves mountains when He speaks, same power that can calm a raging sea lives in us, lives in us, lives in us, lives in us. I can see waters raging at my feet. I can feel breath
lives in us. Lord, I pray today that we would leave here on fire for you. That we would leave here empowered by your Holy Spirit, knowing that there is nothing that this world can throw at us that will destroy us in you. They might be able to destroy the physical, but the spiritual is anchored to you in the palm of your hand. Lord, I pray that 2019 would be a year of us willing to risk, of us willing to step out, of us willing to move forward, and willing to do what it takes to get closer to you. Lord, make our hearts yearn for those we walk by every day. Give us the words and the resources to reach out to them, to make them feel loved, needed, and accepted. Lord, may we be ever more on fire for you. And may we see you moving in our midst, that there would be new faces, that there would be new people that would be coming. And Lord, that we would be able to reach out and help them any way possible to prove to them that you love them just as much as you love us. Lord, help us to not be content, but to help us always be striving for more of you, more in you, and more of your Spirit. That in 2019 your Spirit would grow here and empower us to be able to go out. That we wouldn't be looking at failing, because with you and your Spirit, success is the only option available, providing we're willing to risk and to give all. And Lord, I pray that for each person that is here today, that you would implant within us that strong, firm faith in you, that we can't fail, that we can't lose, and that we can only gain more territory by giving you everything we have. Lord, we ask all this in your precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Same power that rose Jesus from the grave, same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. Same power that moves mountains when he speaks, same power that can